All right, we are live, and this is the first night of our series. We're going to start doing an interview every night at 6 p.m. That's the goal right now. We're adapting with the times as much as everybody else is, and so honored today to be talking with Jason Kander. He's just downriver from us. I'm in Sioux City. He's down in Kansas City. Jason, how are you doing?
I'm great, man. Thanks for. So this is the inaugural one of these.
This is the very first one, yeah. So
nowhere to go but up from here. So, see ya.
So former Secretary of State in Missouri, you're the first millennial for statewide. Is that right?
Yeah, first millennial ever elected statewide, which comes with no special powers, but looks good on a book jacket.
What is the like? I think if depending on different definitions, I'm like either one of the oldest millennials or I'm like one of the youngest. I was 80, March of 1980.
Yeah, you're a senior millennial, same as me. So I'm
All right.
And some people try and define us out of the generation, and I'm like, I don't know, man. I eat avocado toast. Like, I think it counts. But it's basically 80 to 2000.
Okay.
We'll come up with different ways to do it. And
yeah,
the problem right now is everybody is they've made millennial like this universal term to include Generation Z. So when people are mad that folks are like at spring break on beaches in Florida, they're like, these millennials. I'm like, those aren't millennials. They're in their 30s. And
right.
Anyway.
Right. It is yeah. Well, I just turned 40, and so that's kind of freaking me out these days. And trying to.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. So, but how about Corona? Everything Corona? How's the family doing?
We're really fortunate. We're good. I mean, my wife and son have turned out to be model prisoners. They're following all of my edicts, which is nice. No, it's. I mean, there are a lot of people who are really, really seriously affected. We are fortunate so far not to be in that group. I'm able to do my work from home. So is Diana. Today was so my son, for whatever reason, his school has a 2-week spring break. So we were kind of homeschooling just like on our own during the last week of it, just because there was nothing to do.
Right.
But today was the first day of the school sent stuff homeschooling. And fortunately, it went pretty well. Like, my wife was joking before that like she would teach math and science and reading and writing, and I would teach PE. Today, like, she needed to get work done, so like I handled the schooling, and it was actually really fun. I don't know if you remember kindergarten, but like it's kind of a blast. So we danced and we read some stuff and we did some math, and like, I mean,
that's awesome.
Knock on wood, day one, but we were having a pretty good time.
So, I mean, Sioux City, we're tri-state. We got North Sioux City, South Dakota, South Sioux City, Nebraska, and here in Sioux City, Iowa. And so for me, it's been very interesting to see the different states and how they react. And so, like, we're the bigger hub of the three. And so our heads are kind of on a swivel on like, you can still go across the river and go out to eat, which most places, it's one of the few places I think in America where you can still do that. So, but then over the weekend, we saw some of these counties started getting infected cases and everything like that. And I know Missouri, Kansas City is, but you have two different types of governors too. You have a Democratic governor in Kansas and a Republican in Missouri. How's that been?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to what you described. It's very different. I mean, Missouri, they haven't done the statewide stuff has not been as pronounced, but in Kansas City, Missouri, and in all the counties, around here, like the whole metro area on both sides, they all did it at the same time. But yeah, I mean, it was interesting to see them come to a consensus about it, because like where I live, I live in Missouri, but I mean, not anymore, but there was a time when I could throw a baseball to Kansas, from where we live. I mean, we're pretty close. So, in the more rural areas, I mean, perhaps it's taken longer for the virus to hit there, but it's one of those things. I describe it as like how I thought of a backup weapon when I was deployed. It's like, I would rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So it's like, just shut it down, man. That's sort of my philosophy. But how's campaigning
it's been, I mean, we're having to adjust. So much of our campaign is getting in my RV and going out to all 39 counties. And I put 35,000 miles on my personal vehicle, and then Winnebago RVs are made in the district. So we bought a used one, threw the logo on the side, and went to all 39 at least 3 times last time. And so that was the plan, but and now that the weather's just starting to get nice, that was the plan, to get out there, especially talk with a lot of farmers right now as they prepare for planting season. And but I mean, we're adjusting like everybody else. We're going to be doing a lot more of these, and just having discussions, and just trying to maximize the time. Fundraising's been very difficult, because it's hard to ask somebody when everyone's so uncertain about everything. And so we did a video that we sent out to folks over the weekend, I think, that said, hey, if you have a buck or two, give it to a local business, give it to a local nonprofit. They need help right now. And then if you have a couple more bucks after that, we'd be open. But like, again, we got to support our local communities first.
Well, I mean, it's big of you. I like that, but people should also know that, like,
well, we're still focused on November. There's no doubt about that.
It's still going to happen. And like, this is one of those things where there are people that we should absolutely be supporting right now. People who are on the front lines of this, folks who are medical personnel, folks who are working in grocery stores, and all this kind of stuff. And at the same time, it's one of those things where, the best thing most people can do during their day is stay at home. If you are somebody who is fortunate enough to work from home and not be in financial distress right now, for those folks, some of whom I hope are watching, you should still be giving money to campaigns. Like, you should still be involved in campaigns and everywhere you can, because November is still going to happen. And by the way, like, look, I'm not trying to politicize this situation, but like, different leadership would have been nice. And so like, it's not hard to see how like,
I know.
We still make that happen.
My mom is a former public health professional, or public health director. And so she's been prepared for something like this for decades. And then over the weekend, there's 2 articles that really, I did a video yesterday on it, that really bothered me. One, a huge thing we talk about is enforcing our antitrust laws. And we talk it in agriculture. I talk about that all the time. But one thing we saw was, in antitrust, there's things called killer acquisitions, where a big company buys a competitor and just kills it off. Yeah. Well, one of the companies that was supposed to be our go-to for ventilators was part of a killer acquisition, and there was nothing there. And so
antitrust laws in general are, I mean, Teddy Roosevelt was all about them.
Yeah.
And it's, man, I look at, particularly on the agricultural side, I remember, my opponent when I ran for the Senate in 2016, I'm pretty sure he got endorsed by Farm Bureau like before he announced he was running for re-election. They liked it. But they couldn't stop me from going to local farm bureaus. So I would still show up at local farm bureaus. And, the local person there, like, they're a member of Farm Bureau. They're not all that politically active. They don't know who the organization's endorsed, who they haven't. So if the local Farm Bureau guy would let me talk, I'd get up and I'd talk about things like, the labeling acts. I'd talk about how, if folks know that you're, that what's in the store to be bought comes from Mexico, Missouri, instead of Mexico, the country, like, it makes a difference. I'd say all this stuff and everybody'd be like, man, that was great. Like, so Farm Bureau is supporting you? And I'd be like, no, they're supporting the other guy. And they're like, why? And my answer was always, because they're, I don't know what your Farm Bureau situation is, but I would always just say, like, well, because of corporate interest, basically. And everything I just said is, about, actual farmers. And so.
Farm Bureau endorsed Steve King last cycle, but there was one county, Winnebago County, that Farm Bureau rejected the endorsement, and they wrote a letter to the editor, and it was pretty cool.
That's very.
So one thing I want,
right?
What's that?
He's running again, right?
Yeah. So it's the only race in America where I think the incumbent has a primary and the challenger doesn't. It's a very unique situation.
Well, I'll talk to you when.
Before we get too far, I do want to tell folks who are watching, you can have a question in the comments. We'll take a few questions at the end too. So I'm speaking with Jason Kander here. One of the things I wanted to talk to you, last cycle you did Let America Vote, and just kind of talk a little bit about what got you to do that and what you guys were able to do.
Sure. So, I used to be the Secretary of State of Missouri, and I'd seen voter suppression up close and personal. I'd seen the whole strategy played out by the Republicans before. And then 2016 happens, Trump takes, he he wins, and he wins anyway. He wins. He's going to become president, right? And he's talking about all this voter fraud that didn't happen, and he's making all this stuff up. And I could just see the future, right? It was not hard to see because I'd seen it play out in my state, and I'd fought it before, and I knew where they were going. And so we started Let America Vote, and it was pretty novel at the time because it, for the longest time, voting rights was a legal fight exclusively. And
Yeah.
we would often win the legal fight, but we knew they were going to get a bunch of judges, and we weren't going to be able to expect to do that forever. And we had never engaged in the political fight. And there had been this assumption for a long time that, well, you can't win the political fight on voting rights. And I always said, well, yeah, you can't win any fight you're not in. So Let America Vote was really the first time that anybody went out and said, let's dive into the political fight over voting rights by creating consequences politically for trampling on voting rights. Because like if you're a state legislator or a member of Congress and you trample on voting rights, that law may lose in the courts, but nobody ever made hay of it politically, so you don't ever suffer for it. So there's no reason not to do it. And so we challenged that. And so we created quite a movement, actually, millions of dollars, and more importantly, hundreds of thousands of supporters and tens of thousands of volunteers across the country. And we won over, again, in 18, we won over 100 elections. And we created a political consequence for voter suppression. And now I'm really gratified to see that, Let America Vote, I'm no longer running it, but it's flourishing, it's doing great. And it's also really sparked a much larger movement. Right. But it was super. Iowa was one of our states in 2018. We were really involved there. We had hundreds, I think thousands of people on the ground. And I loved being there. I was in your district multiple times. And
it was a huge, I thought it was very helpful for Iowa State University, especially getting those kids active and letting them know they could vote. And that's a huge part of our base here in the 4th District.
Yeah.
So very grateful for that.
But Paul Pate and his photo ID stuff, it was not hard to figure out that we were going to go take a shot at Iowa. And obviously the Secretary of State's race didn't work out, but the auditor's race did, and several other things. So
yeah. One of the things, you came up here to Sioux City, and I assume it was for Let America Vote. I can't remember.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a story about door knocking, your first time door knocking, and I've repeated it thousands of times to tell folks it's so important, especially Midwest Democrats. There's something about being a Midwest Democrat, and that's why we all look up to you so much here in Iowa. Because last cycle when I was running, we had Dave Loebsack in the 2nd district, and that's it. We didn't have any senators. The state house, the Republicans had that state house, state senate, the governorship. And so you mentioned the showing up and door knocking. I would love for you to tell that story because I love the story.
Sure. I would try to tell it over the sound of my dog protecting the house. She's a germaphobe, so she's I can see out the window that another dog has created the great sin of walking by our house. It's funny. I haven't told that story in a little while, but it is a good story, and it has a lot to do with sort of how I formed my philosophy of how to engage with people politically. I first office I ever ran for was the state legislature. It was in 2008, so here in Kansas City, and I was 26 years old, fresh back from Afghanistan, had crew cut and the whole thing. Not that my hair is super long now, although I had more of it through here at the time. But anyway, so I'm knocking on doors, and I hadn't been doing it very long. It was one of the very first doors I ever knocked on, so I was pretty nervous. I remember I knocked on the door, and I remember the shot of nerves you get when you can hear, you're happy somebody's home, but you can hear them coming down the stairs, and you're okay, starting to get going. And so the fellow comes to the door, and we have a brief chat, and I kind of do my rap at the beginning. And I said, is there an issue that's most important to you? And I don't remember what issue it was now, but he named an issue, and then I kind of said what I thought about it, and it became really clear that he didn't agree with me at all. And so then I start trying to do what I'd seen politicians on TV do, which is try and convince him that really we agreed, and that made things worse because then clearly we didn't. And now we're in an argument about it. And I was thinking man, this is not going well. I don't know if I should be running for office. And so finally I just said, it sounds like we don't agree on this, and I really appreciate your time. But at least you'll know that I'll have these conversations with you or something like that. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I basically acknowledged we didn't agree, and I thanked him for his time, and I was going to move on to the next door. So I turn around, shake his hand, turn around, I'm walking down the steps, and I hear him say like, "Yeah, that's fair. Anyway, I'll vote for you. You can put a sign in my yard if you want to." And it just, I realized, that like I'd given him this flyer, and he wasn't even going to flip it over and look at the other side. He wasn't going to go to my website and read every position I held. What that guy cared about was what most voters really care about at the end of the day, which is he just wanted to know that I really believed what it was I was saying, and that I cared about him, and that I believed what I believed because I thought it was the best thing for him. He didn't necessarily have to agree with me on everything. He just needed to know that I was making decisions with people like him in mind. And from then on, I was just addicted to just having a really honest conversation with folks. And I found that it's way easier and it's politically far more effective.
Absolutely. This district is not an easy district. Trump won it by 27 points. We lost by 3. We moved the needle 24 points, which we were very excited about. But when I first launched the campaign, I'm like, how in the world can we even come close, let alone win? And I did a lot of research, and I saw what my 2 political heroes, Berkeley Bedell, who just passed away at 98 years old, used to be a longtime congressman in Northwest Iowa, and Tom Harkin. In 84, they represented 80% of the district, and they got out there to the people, proved they're trustworthy, and proved that they're going to fight for their constituents. And that's my philosophy. And I remember stopping in a bar, probably one of the first months of the campaign. And at the end of the night, just have a beer, and a waitress from a bar down the street, she was taking a break and she was grabbing a sandwich or something. We started talking. Doesn't agree with me anything, but when she walked away, she goes, "Well, you got my vote." The same thing. And it's so much about showing up. So yeah.
Show up, and it's a test really, because when they ask you what you believe, like you got a choice, right? You got a lot of politicians who will say not what they believe, but what they think the person believes.
Right.
Think it's a test question that they got to get the right answer to. But that's not the test. The test is, will you just tell me what you really think? Because the thing is, if you give them the answer that you think they like is their answer, they can tell. So you lose either way. Like you can dive in and say, okay, actually I'm with you, and then they're not going to believe you, so they're not going to vote with you.
Right.
Know that you're full of it. And then the second thing that's going to happen is the people who do agree with you are like, I'm not excited about this guy anymore. He doesn't agree with me. So you may as well just go with what you actually think. And I happen to think that like this whole argument that tends to go on within the party of, and it tends to be about places like where we're from, right? Middle of the country or the South or whatever. And they'll say, does progressive politics, does it really work there? And what I think people don't get is that it's not a matter of moderate or progressive or whatever. It is a matter of talking to the issues that people care about. You don't have to change your position. Like I'm a very progressive guy. I'm a liberal. And I happen to think that the 4 things people care about the most in the middle of the country and throughout the country really is just one thing really. And it's their family being able to be happy, healthy, safe, and nearby. And the difference between politics in the Midwest and politics on the coast is not a matter of policy. The difference is, do you talk to all 4 of those things? Because like if you're on the coast, happy, healthy, safe, I know which issues that applies to. But if you live in a place that our kids are constantly moving to, it doesn't occur to you that you need to talk about nearby. So when we talk about our issues, we got to talk about how it is that progressive policy choices are making it more likely that your kids can grow up where you grew up, and your grandkids aren't going to live a flight away from you. Like that's what I think all of it's about for people.
I mean, exactly. This 4th district, my high school, we had our 20th reunion in 18, and the majority of the kids are living elsewhere. And at best, they're in Omaha or Des Moines. But I mean, a lot of folks are down in your neck of the woods.
Yeah.
Down in Kansas City. And so, I mean, when I moved back here several years ago, I looked in my hometown paper for a job, and the best job I could find was $15 an hour, no benefits. Right. And that's not keeping people here. And so
that's all anybody wants. We just we just want to be able to like live on a safe street, have a good job, have healthcare. it'd be within 20 minutes of our kids and our grandkids. And a lot of folks our age may not admit it, but look, they want to be within 20 minutes of their parents. Like, one, you want to be around your parents, and even if you don't, you really don't want to pay for childcare 2 days a week. That when they get paid for your kids, like, it's really what the whole thing's about. And I just think that our party stands for the things that make that possible.
Yeah, there was I mentioned the article about antitrust. The other article that really bothered me, it was in the New York Times yesterday, and it talked about there's a big Republican donor who's given, I think, $36 or $26 million since 2008 to campaigns or PACs, and then a political operative, which another term for a lobbyist. And they started a company just recently, and they're selling PPEs, they're selling ventilators, they're selling respirators. And when asked, like, how did they get them? They said, well, when you reach a certain level in politics, you're one phone call away from anyone in the world. Yeah. And it's just like, you have a chance to use your political clout for the common good. And yet it's such selfish greed and unpatriotic and all that stuff. And so what my big frustration is, if you show that article to the 90% of Americans, I would say, if not more, they would just be furious. And how do we get that furious into votes? And so I guess that's my
they're talking about it all the time. And by making an issue, I mean, I think you're doing it right. Like, you gotta constantly keep putting it up front, because it's not what the other side wants up front. The other side wants, all sorts of glittery stuff that's going to distract you from it. And it's like, no. Everything that you're concerned about, this is why it's happening. This is why we feel locked out of things. It's a matter of access. And you're right. Like, it's funny how it is even assumed that when you have held office or run for office, gotten to a point in politics, and then you back away from it, people just assume that's what you're going to do. I, as a lot of people know, October 2018, I stepped back to work on post-traumatic stress from Afghanistan. And so I took about 7 months to do therapy. And then I was feeling better, and I was like, all right, I'm going to get back to work, and I had to decide what I was going to do. And I didn't, I'm not running for office or anything like that. So I ended up going to work at this Displaced Veterans Community Project that had helped me. And now I'm the president of it. But what's interesting about that is that over the last year or whatever of that time, I've been approached by so many people who assume one of two things about me. One, that I'm ready to quote unquote cash out, and they'll offer me some board position, corporate board position. Nothing against that stuff, but like, not what I'm interested in doing. And then if they don't assume that, then they assume that I'm just here in a holding pattern until I can run for something again. And I guess they figure, well, if he's not taking the money, then it must be that he is, worried about how it'll look. And so therefore he's clearly running for something. And the truth is, like, I did cash out. I cashed out for homeless veterans. and I use my clout and my influence and my network. I just use it to build Veterans Community Project. And it's amazing it's sad. I'm not saying, whoa, look how great I am. I'm saying, I think it's sad that is a big surprise to people.
Yeah. I mean, being around, you see, there's definitely people who run because they like their name in the papers, they like the power and stuff like that. You get to see people like that. But I mean, then you hear stories of people who are in it for the right reason, and the people who are wanting to serve. And that's one of the biggest things, I get asked all the time, what's the difference between you and Steve King, to people who are not political and don't follow. Right. And so, I mean, there's the obvious controversial racism and all that stuff over here. But I also tell, the way I view this job is to serve, and constituent services would be my number one thing. And if in a time of crisis like this, you don't see him having videos on where you can go to get resources or anything like that right now. You see him on his Facebook doing memes that are for like conspiracy theory crap. And so, but I don't want to talk about that, but I do want to talk, it was a good segue to the Veterans Community Project.
I appreciate that, but for everybody watching, I'm not a politician, but I'm still political. And I'll say, man, like, you outperformed by 24 points last time, and that's awesome. And I think you're going to do even better this time. I think you're a great candidate. But for everybody watching, I'm like, you got to do everything you can to make sure JD wins this race, and not just because like Steve King is Steve King. You got to do it because like you're going to be a great congressman. It'll be awesome. But anyway.
But I'm glad you talked about the Veterans Community Project. I think this is absolutely amazing. And would you describe a little bit more about it? I think this will probably end on this. Well, I have one more question after this, but
okay. Well, yeah, thanks. So Veterans Community Project is a nonprofit based here in Kansas City. And it was started by a handful of combat veterans my age, so my fellow combat vets who got together a few years ago. I was not one of them. I'm late to this party, and they said, okay, we think we can plug in some of these gaps in veteran services, and the biggest gap that they decided to help close for folks is that most of us assume that people who served in the military that they're a veteran, and they are to us, and I think they are. But the federal government, a really large percentage of them, doesn't consider them a veteran for the, like purposes of services. So depending on their discharge status, depending on how long they were on active duty, when, where, all that kind of stuff. And so they wanted to make sure that they served everybody who'd ever sworn the oath. And then the second, and fill in all those gaps. And the second thing was for veterans homelessness to create an environment that would create transitional housing for homeless veterans to move into permanent housing, and again, serve folks who wouldn't otherwise be served by the existing system. And it's worked extremely well. It's been all privately funded because of all the strings attached to the federal money that wouldn't allow them to serve the same population. And, one of the guys had a law degree, but everybody else, the entirety of their professional background really was the military. And they just approached it like the military. They were like, failure's not an option. We're going to figure this out. And they've pretty well eradicated veterans homelessness in Kansas City. They've served over 7,000 veterans, including myself with my paperwork initially with the VA. And it's awesome. And so then they started getting all these inquiries from other cities around the country, hundreds, that were saying, hey, come here and do it here. And, because it's a really unique concept. It's a village of tiny houses as transitional housing. It's really inspiring. And so they weren't sure how to do that. And right around that time, I was coming back into thinking about what I wanted to do professionally, and I was hanging around all the time because I just loved the place. And they said, hey, you built a national organization before. We don't know how to do that. Do you want to do it here? I was like, yeah, absolutely. So it's great. It's, run by myself and a bunch of other combat vets. So it's great for me. I sit around with the guys and tell stories and run the organization, and we're growing, and national expansion is kind of my focus.
I love it. Where can folks go to find more about it?
They can go to veteranscommunityproject.org, and they can also
put that in the comments too. So
thanks, I appreciate it.
Yeah. One thing, I guess, before I ask my last question, the rural areas, especially here in the 4th District, disproportionately produces a lot of military service folks. But then when they're done, there's not a lot of opportunities. Like I was mentioned before, $15 an hour here in Sioux City, the largest city in the district, with no benefits. And so there's a lot of mental stress. There's just a lot of stress in general. What type of things do you see that we could be doing for veterans in these rural areas?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing, whether you're in a rural area or an urban area, there's two sides to it. So there's the federal policy side, which is there's a whole bunch of things we can do to ease the transition out of the military. I mean, we don't do a very good job, and it's getting better, but we still don't do a good job at all of treating, separating from the military as well as we treat, transferring from one posting to the next. If you're serving at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii and you get transferred to Fort Gordon, Georgia, there's somebody who's responsible for you in Hawaii and somebody who's going to be responsible for you in Georgia, and they do a handoff. One of them knows when you got there, but when you leave the military and go back home, there's nobody at the VA who's responsible for receiving you. There's nobody, there's nothing like that. So that'd be one thing that we could do just in general everywhere. On the policy side, on the sort of societal side, what the average person can do is recognize the hiring veterans is not an act of charity. It's a good business decision. I mean, we are talking about folks who particularly, and look, all the generations of veterans have this skill, but I can only speak for my own. You know, when you think about what these wars have been, I mean, responsibility has been pushed down to the lowest possible level. Like there was a book written several years ago about this generation of warfare, and it refers to it as the corporal's war, because these conflicts are turning not on big decisions made by generals around a sand table, but they're turning on split-second decisions made by young enlisted soldiers and Marines and sailors and airmen, and so as a result, people are coming back, and if you offer a service member, you say, okay, I don't have any jobs that require you to kick in doors, you know, so I'll just bring you in at the entry level position. What you're not realizing is, you know, you may think of this person as a trigger puller or a door kicker. What they are is about to be the best manager in your entire company, because you give me somebody who's an E5 sergeant with one tour or even maybe no tours, and you come and they're competing against a Harvard MBA. I'm hiring the E5 sergeant for a management position. They've already managed millions of dollars in equipment, and they've been responsible for people's lives, and they've had to do it 24 hours a day under seriously difficult conditions. So that's what I think people need to recognize across the country is, you know, hire a vet is not like give to charity. Hire a vet is like take advantage of this incredibly valuable commodity that's very scarce right now.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, before you go, I have one last question. You're a Royals fan. So 2015, you guys won the World Series. 2014, you were in the World Series, and you didn't get beat by the Giants. You got beat by Madison Bumgarner. It was the most dominant pitching performance I think I've seen in a World Series. Just he was outstanding. Alex Gordon, who was a year after me at Nebraska, or he got there right after I was done. So I know him a little bit. He was on tomorrow's, well, and this is a segue to tomorrow's guest is Tony Watson, pitcher for the San Francisco Giants. Those two played on the 2005 Nebraska team that made it to the College World Series. And so Alex Gordon, down by 1, 9th inning, game 7, hits into left center, outfielder dives for it, misses it, goes around, and I think it's officially a double with an error, but there was debate if the third baseman or third base coach should call him to go home or hold up there. And so with that being the situation, if you're the third base coach, the most dominant pitching performance you've seen in the World Series in a long, long time, do you send him or do you do what the coach did and keep him?
No, Jershely, the third base coach, I mean, did the right thing, right? He, and in fact, they've like local news has several times like tried to reproduce the entire scenario, and there hasn't been a single time where they've been able to have the runner score. You would take like take a really bad throw, and which wasn't going to happen, and you know, even Gordon after the game was like, look, if I had Dyson or Gore's speed, like send me, right. And so think about it, like we come back and we win in 15, which is why I now can appreciate Madison Bumgarner, but otherwise it'd be too painful. But like, think about, I don't know if it plays out the same way if he gets tagged standing up halfway between third and home. Right. And so the other thing people forget is the next guy up was Salvador Perez.
Right, who was the hottest. Yeah,
I mean, he had that game-winning, I was at the wild card game that year. He had that game-winning hit. I mean, so, you know, so you had a right-handed batter coming up against Bumgarner. It was Salvi, who was a clutch hitter, and also like, by the time the infielder received the relay, Gordon was just arriving at third. So, and Gordon's an incredible player, but like he's above average speed, but
not Dyson speed, but yeah.
So, and I think he was pretty winded too. I mean,
yeah. I mean, it's one of those. It all what it came down to, if in a clutch situation, does that shortstop have a good relay? And that's and so
you can compare it to Game 5 the next year, where Salvi's up and Salvi hits the little ball to right at third, and you got Hosmer on third, and Hosmer makes the mad dash for home, but it was a calculated mad dash. in any other situation, you'd say it was a terrible decision, except for the fact that they knew that Lucas Duda struggled to throw the ball home.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the case in 14. So anyway, I could talk about it.
Well, you won't be able to hear the applause from all the people on Facebook Live. It's one of the things we're adapting to. But thank you so much for your time. Before I forget, tomorrow you're being part of a fundraiser as well.
Yeah, I'm doing. It's for Run for Something.
Yep.
And
Great organization.
yeah, people can go to my Twitter feed and see the details because I don't remember them.
Yeah, no worries. I think it's 8 o'clock, or it's 8 o'clock Eastern, so 7 o'clock. So tomorrow we're doing the same thing at 6, and then you have time to jump on over, watch the Run for Something or Drink for Something on behalf of Run for Something. So
yeah, that's fun.
thank you for all that you do. You're someone that a lot of people look up to, me included, and just really appreciate you coming here and helping us out and being our very first guest. So
thank you. Thanks for running. I think you're going to win. You're going to do a great job, and I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.